gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous.
Thanks,
You always have such just lush textures on the instrument.
I
Such
appreciate
a
that.
beautiful touch on the instrument.
Thank you.
Wow, so many things to just jump into. One of the questions Randy was saying, how did you decide on such an unusual tuning?
I think that I've spent a lot of years. When I first started playing guitar, it was all different tunings. You know, I was really excited about that. You know, you learn your first position chords, but pretty soon after that, I was like, I'm just going into no man's land. I'm going to try to find all the crazy tunings. And then I went through a lot of years of just playing standard tuning. Standard tuning was like my main. It's like a blank canvas. You know, when you start with an open tuning, that is sort of like starting a painting with an outline, and sometimes that's good, you know. But standard tuning for me is just something that I've just fallen in love with years and years. And so I allowed myself to venture back into the alternate tunings again and kind of go back as if when I was first exploring it. And I had this idea. I did a tour in China back in 2017, and with my good friend Callum Graham and a great Japanese guitar player named Yuki Matsui. And I just had the melody and a couple of the rhythms in my mind for this piece, and then I went straight from there. I stopped at home, and then I ended up playing at a guitar festival in Cartagena, Colombia.
Wow.
And so I was just in the back, you know, while everyone was kind of getting warmed up and just trying to pick up the different rhythms. And so I started the idea in standard tuning, and then I just, you know, the Michael Hedges approach of like, something's not working, tune another string, something's not working, until I landed on this. Oh, maybe I should unmute here. And it just felt like immediately something, there was a whole song in there, you know, and that gave me, it was just kind of like returning to open tunings when I was a kid and just finding that excitement again. I'm always about trying to make sure I hold on to what is the initial reason I play, because it's very easier as we get older and, oh, that's just an A minor, that's just an E, you know, I still want to feel excited about the sound, you know, so this was kind of a return to that for me.
Yeah. One of the things I've just appreciated your playing is just such colors and such richness in your harmonies of doing all that. There's not another that sounds like what you're creating on the instrument, and I think it's wonderful. Talk us through some of the things that some of the textures and sounds you went through.
Sure. So it's very funny. I mean, especially sound guys, you know, rolling up to a venue where they're like, it's an acoustic guitar. Like, am I just getting a direct in? And I'm like, oh no, it takes a lot of electronics to get a natural acoustic guitar sound. You know what I mean? And so I have everything into this. It's called the Radial PZ Pro. I was playing a couple of guys years ago. We did Candy Rat Records, Candy Rat Guitar Night. And I was with my friend Craig DeAndrea, and we were playing somewhere, I think in Ohio, and lightning struck the building in the middle of soundcheck, and it fried my gear. I was using a D-Tar unit at the time, and so for that night I plugged into Craig's, and he had a Radial, and I was just like, bam, what is that? Everything was just fat, clean. It was just a really, really nice sound. So from that point on, it was like every single Radial, you know, product, you know, of these kind of like they have the PZ Pre. I bought a bunch of those, and then this is the PZ Pro. It's a 2-channel preamp, and then I run the effects. So I have a compressor, but you know, compressors and acoustic guitars can get really, really crazy unless you're in an ensemble setting. Compression can just kind of like bump, you know, the top down. But I just got all full nerddom going, and I plugged in, this is a TC Electronic Hypergravity. I plugged that into the computer, and you can adjust all the knobs. So those knobs don't do what they say on the pedal. I reassign them. So I'm only compressing the low end. And that's just, you know, just because I like the sound of that. Then I go into a Digitech Polera. I guess I could give you kind of an example.
Yeah, kind of show us what
so,
those sounds are doing.
So this would be without the low end going, and then just kind of gives a little more smoothness. And then they have reverb number 1 of 4. Reverb number 1. This is sort of my grand hall reverb. So that's
And what is that?
This is called the Digitech Polera, and this was the first pedal that I found that had like the Lexicon Hall reverb in it. It's got those algorithms, and there's been a few different series of that pedal from Digitech Polera. It was like the Hardwire series before, but I really love the sound of that, and I keep that on all the time. And then I have a delay here from Walrus Audio. It's called the ARP 87. And what I love about that is, like, as you hear the decay, it gets all kind of tape, echoey delay and grit, and you know, there's a warmth to that I really like, which typically you'd think for acoustic guitar your delay should be clean, but I like them very, very rich and you know, tape echoey and dirty, you know. And then I have another reverb that goes slightly bigger than the Hall, so this is a little bit more Everest. So just a little bit bigger, maybe like a Cathedral, I guess. Maybe not Everest yet, because this one would be my Everest. And that's the Walrus Audio Slow, and I have two of them so that I can, you know, take advantage of multiple settings on that pedal. Then I have this one. And I have, you know, you can't see it here, but I have this little thing that I can control the level of the wet versus the dry with my foot. And so I'm usually live mixing. So if I start with this sort of low, which I did at the beginning of this song, you get that. And then I can go down here and dial it in so that it's... And what I added there, now this is the Walrus Audio Fathom, and so that's my final reverb. That's sort of like the Star Trails, and that's...
Yeah, so it's adding some pitch, upper pitches and
exactly.
shifting up at the top there.
It's, I guess you'd call it like a shimmer reverb.
Yeah.
Some of the shimmer reverbs sound very metallic-y, but one thing I love about Walrus Audio is everything has that kind of, like, again, degrading tape, kind of modulating warmth. It doesn't feel too plasticky. And then I have a BBE Sonic Stomp. Oh, let me turn that off here. So that just gives a little bit more boost, rounds out the sound, and then I have a Ditto Looper, and I run that through the effects loop all the way in. So it sounds, it is kind of crazy, but one thing that I really love about, especially the Walrus Audio stuff, is as I'm playing, I can just hit the pedal, and it'll momentarily turn it on, and then it'll come back, you know, when I take my foot off, it'll turn it off.
It's almost like a sustain pedal.
Exactly. And then it's off. So
Yeah.
I can sort of live mix the reverb, which is how when I record my records, I'm literally like every note, we're riding the reverb, because the reverb is the next instrument aside from just the guitar in the mix.
Yeah.
So that's my attempt to try to do that live.
Tell us about that amazing, beautiful instrument you're playing.
Yeah, so this is built by Sheldon Schwartz from Toronto, Ontario, a little north of Toronto. And I met him through our mutual friend Eric Mongrain. So we were up at the Canadian Guitar Festival years ago, 2011, 2012-ish. And he said, you got to meet Trevor, you have to meet this guy, Sheldon Schwartz. He is, you know, the best builder. And I met Sheldon and we hung out, and I just knew right away, oh my gosh, like, we just got along really, really well. And it's funny, in the, you know, the custom building community, you know, everyone's personalities comes out in their build. And I think just the way that I got along with this guy, I'm like, I bet he builds a great guitar.
Yeah.
And so I just decided, you know, he and I were talking about, you know, building something together, and I put my deposit down. And then I was playing up in Michigan, and I have a friend up there who had, you know, like 30 different guitars from all the top custom builders, you know, Kevin Ryan, Loudon, like all of them. And I loved each and every one of them, but I landed on this one that had no name on it. And it just, not only did it feel like it was it was responding and listening to what I was playing, it felt like there was a lot of care taken into the comfort of it. And there was this like feedback loop that I was playing it over and over. And he said, oh yeah, the name's not on there, but it's a guy named Sheldon Schwartz from Toronto, Ontario. And I said, you got to be kidding me. I just put a deposit down to build a guitar with him. And so out of a lineup of all of them, I still picked this.
His guitar, wow.
Yeah, and so he does a lot of, this is called, it's actually his Oracle guitar has a lot of really interesting things you don't see on the inside, but he's really, really progressive with how he builds. He has lattice bracing as opposed to a standard standard X brace, as well as he does carbon fiber. And all that means is that this guitar is very open. It sounds really, really open, but it's built like a tank, and it can survive late planes and getting in and out of taxis and things.
Yeah.
So I have another guitar he's building me right now, but something about his guitars just really, really connect, and I think that's important. It doesn't always have to be a super expensive guitar. The custom line of guitars does add up in price, but what's important is, I think, a physical reaction you have when you play guitar in your chest. I think the way that it feels in your chest cavity, the way it vibrates the bones, that is most important. And sometimes you find that out of a $1,000 guitar, and sometimes you don't get it out of a $40,000 guitar. So what's most important is that feel, and that's part of why I love his work, because every guitar I've ever played from him has that thing, whatever it is, it's there.
Yeah, amazing. Well, it gets such a full sound, and that combined with all the things going on there, it's just gorgeous. Very lush, very lush. Now you've had such an amazing career. How did you get started playing? Did you come from a musical family? I know you're from the Philadelphia area.
Yes, so I moved to Philadelphia in '99, but I was raised in Rochester, New York, upstate New York. So grew up there, and so kindergarten up till 8th grade, and then moved. I think that I don't have any musicians in the family, and I'm not aware of. My grandpa played, he plays piano a little bit. My mom played a little bit of piano grudgingly. My dad was a pastor, so she played, for the church hymns, and she got through it, but it was not her passion, But one thing that was interesting is that she loved Windham Hill records. She loved Bach. She loved, the early Phil Keaggy stuff, and then, Beyond Nature is one of my all-time favorite records, And so she was just always playing music in the house. So I think that just got into my consciousness. Michael Hedges, Will Ackerman, all of that stuff. So there weren't any musicians around, and I had a friend down the street who got an electric guitar. But aside from that, until I got into 8th grade, 7th and 8th grade, I started, making friends with a couple of other guitar buddies. But up to that point, it was like there weren't really musicians to play with.
Did you have a formal education? Did you take it in school, private lessons, anything like that, college?
Yeah, I started with 1 year at a music store at Atlas Music in Webster, New York. And right as soon as I joined, my guitar teacher said, "Oh, my previous student just had a hit on the radio. You might know him. It was from the band Jars of Clay." That guy, Matt, he was from that area. And I was like, no way. So I took a year from him, and then I went to this place called the Hochstein School of Music in Rochester. My dad had enrolled me in that, and I got into the note reading and into the theory, and then I moved moved down to Pennsylvania, and I studied at a music school there with a great guitar teacher for me there. His name was Tom Sugar. And then from there I went to I started studying with a jazz and classical professor named Don Reese. And I was about 14, I think, when I started studying with him, and what was amazing about his approach was it was never, you want to do classical, here's what you got to do, here's the tradition. It was like 1 week we were, knee deep in Bach, and then I'd come in and we were doing Holdsworth, and then Coltrane, and then Villalobos. And I think part of what he instilled in me was he saw that I was really curious on all these different things, but he didn't force me into any one path. It was very, I'd just come in every week with a list of questions. And so I think he knew early on how to encourage that. He would show me something, and I'd come back the next week having written, 4 or 5 songs using that technique. And so it goes to show good music education is it's not just sort of forcing the path. It really is being open to what the student is interested in. And, I take that into my own teaching today.
Yeah. And you do some online teaching, some Skype, Zoom sort of lessons?
I do the private lessons, and I just released course number 18 with TrueFire. So
wow, I found 3. I thought because I know you had done, I've got it in my notes here, you have done the building colorful chords, which would be tremendous. You got the Fingerstyle thumb control, Christmas Fingerstyle, and then what are some of the other ones that you've done with TrueFire?
I have one, my very first course was Jam Play TrueFire. They're the same company now, but crafting Fingerstyle melodies. That's kind of like the master course. That's sort of like the trunk of the tree. And then I have all these other branch courses from there. I have one that I talk about like the history of fingerstyle guitar told through exercises. So we start with some of the early ragtime piano thumb things all the way up to the contemporary. The Christmas one, the most recent one was called, with Triplicity. I have a new group with Andy McKee and Callum Graham. And so we did a course where you can learn each of our parts, and then you can actually solo some of the parts you can play in the mix if you want. And so that was kind of a really fun approach.
Which I've watched some of the videos that you've released, the ones that you've released so far. Just amazing work.
Oh, thank you.
With Andy
Thank you.
Just brilliant.
It's been so fun to look at fingerstyle from an ensemble perspective, not just, most of the time fingerstyle covers all the bases, your bass lines, your melodies, your harmony, and it was just really fun to try to, I think each of us have this sensitivity to what is the real core of the song, what is the melody, and how do we support that. So that was a really totally different workflow for me, and I just really enjoyed. I'm really fine. The record is finally out, so you can hunt it down. Triplicity with an I at the end. But yeah, I was really really proud of that work with those guys.
Bob Jones is saying, how do you handle your fingernails on a steel string guitar? I notice you do have the acrylic nails.
These are they're actually like plastic nails. I get these on Amazon. So I tried the acrylic ones, but they never quite felt right. And I was also all the horror stories of somebody on the road and they can't find an open salon and sound check is happening, and so they can't. I wanted to figure out a process for my own nails. So it is the natural nail, but then I top it with 3 layers of this plastic. It's called Mac Art, MAKARTT. They're kind of like the plastic nail, and then
it looks thick.
It does, yeah. So those 3, it's sort of like using a thin guitar pick versus a thick one. If you have more dynamic range if you have thicker, so I can have more power or just have a little bit more oomph in just a single note there. So yeah, they are pretty thick, but I can customize them. And this process I've worked out. I've tried absolutely everything from the ping pong balls to all kinds of, the coatings and all that. And this lasts about 5 to 6 weeks. So it's like this is my solid right now.
Wow. Tell us about your resources on your website, because you've got a lot of teaching, and you mentioned some of the courses and that as well, but you also have tabs and things on your website.
I do, yep. So if you go to trevorgordonhall.com, I have a little drop down for guitar nerds, and so you'll see I have my tunings in there, but I also have tabs for a lot of the tunes, and I'm trying to play catch up now and actually try to do tabs and also step-by-step tutorials where I can walk you through the tab and here's what's happening, because I would get messages from people saying like, what do you do with your index finger on the second beat of measure 32 and such a song, and I'm like, I have to figure out what that means. So now if I can be as detailed as possible, and then that's something that you can access, that makes it a little bit easier. So
yeah,
I have those.
Well, for those of us that are learning and put out resources, we appreciate that and recognize that that's a lot of effort doing that.
It's a lot of effort, but I also feel like so much of what is music, when you hear a really great player on any instrument, you can see it on the page, and that's good because it's preserved exactly what's happening with the finger patterns and everything. But something that's awesome about the step-by-step tutorials, I can say, here's where I typically do a neck bend, or I get into breaking down some of the expressive things. So it's all the things that don't quite make it to the black and white page, you know? So I'm really enjoying that format.
Can you play us another tune?
Absolutely.
What are you going to play for us?
I'm going to play, I've never written a blues before, and this isn't one that's sort of blues adjacent. It's as close as possible, but I call this Ontic Blues, so I hope you enjoy this.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
And you're still in your other tuning. You're still in
I
your...
did retune. This is drop D.
Oh, okay.
This is drop D.
I thought, gosh, you're playing all this and you're still in your weird tuning there.
No, I had to sneak. I haven't written a song in drop D in so many years, and so I was writing this in the key of A, but you can get a low D in there, and that just allowed for a lot. I mean, the whole song was written around this chord because this chord to me is the meaning of life. And I thought, why don't I put that in a blues, right? Can you? But somehow having that low D, that's when I ventured out from standard tuning and realized, oh yeah, there is a lot of ground to cover outside of standard.
Let's talk about your chord usage.
Sure.
That's one of the things that is just so striking in your playing to me is how you're coming up with these sounds. How does it start in your mind with, I mean, you're thinking harmony, but obviously you're coming up with different fingerings as well.
Yep.
Kind of talk us through a little bit of your approach to chord playing.
When I was first starting, it was 1995, and I know to some I'm going to be a real old man saying that, and to others like I'm a real young buck. But in '95, this album from Smashing Pumpkins came out called Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, and there was a tune on there called Tonight Tonight, and I remember listening to this at my neighbor's house, and something about the sound of it was so intriguing to me, and the verse just goes, I'm like, what is that sound? And then not long after that, I ended up, once I was enrolled at the Hochstein Music School in Rochester, I was assigned Snowflight from Andrew York, which was... That was the very first piece of music that I played for a recital and everything, and I just remember the sound. What is that? It gave me a very specific impression. There was this emotional association to it. And years later, I learned, oh, that's a major 7, you know. But when you learn theory, it can get very easy to get lost in what things are called and not necessarily how they function or how they feel. Knowing that that's called a major 7 doesn't take away what that feeling was as a 10-year-old sitting and hearing that sound, you know? So to me, I kind of build these sort of emotional associations with these chords. And I liken it, if you are watching a sunset and an art major comes up and says, well, it's just the color red. It's just, it's just, purple and you miss the whole point. It's not just what it's called, what you experience with it. And so I take that sort of foundation and I try to, approach that in all of these other chords. So the way that I like to approach this is, for example, if I was going to play a normal E minor, right? There's something very grand about a normal E minor. That is as powerful as you can get, right? But what I really love, and I've realized this, is that I really enjoy chords that have tension built into the middle of them. So if you're playing an E minor, I start looking at all of the notes that are the same note. So I have an E here, I have an E here, I have an E here. And so to me, the color of a chord is when you take whenever there are repeating notes and change them. I shop for local notes. So I could, if I have an E here and I have an E here, I could go down 1. That gets really mysterious. I could go up. Doesn't quite nail it. But if I go up just 1 further, I have this really interesting tension. But when you put that in the chord, so now the E minor has this extra color. So I really love the tension in chords. Another example is, unless you're playing death metal, it's not a nice sounding thing, but in the context of the rest of the chord, right? It's that tension that makes that chord colorful and beautiful, So I think for me, when it comes to chords, I really am, the left brain kicks in when I'm stuck, but I really, really try to, move emotionally and say, what does this make me feel? And I remember my teacher was always, he would always reinforce Don Reese, and he would say things like, make sure that you follow your ear, but make sure you expand what your ear is capable of hearing, So that's where Alan Holdsworth and Coltrane and Ted Green, his chords, amazing. So things like that. And I just loved listening to like the piano chords of George Winston, and he has a chord that I figured out this. The very first track on Montana
so what are you
Love
doing?
Story. So this is a version of an E minor. So first finger's on the second fret of the A, and then the third finger on the
F sharp there.
Yeah, the F sharp there. And then I put, this is a little tricky because you have to make sure you clear the open G there, but then the second finger on the third fret of the B, and then I reach all the way up with my pinky here. And I first heard that
To catch that 11th, that 4th up there, yeah.
Exactly. Yep. Something about that was just so interesting. So that sort of has become, I sort of search for different versions of E minor that have, right? Those E minors have something, even if you take them up just a little bit higher. So I just love the feeling of sitting down and playing chords, you know?
Yeah.
I can play a G this way, or I can play a C this way, or I could play it, right? And what's happening in those is me just literally sitting down and enjoying that, the hunt for those things that make me go like, oh.
So you've got a B, a C, a G, and then
The high E.
high E?
Yep. But I'm almost never would you put a 7, you know, that gets really wacky and that gets muddy when you have a 7 as the lowest note. But right there, yeah, the C is here, and so that does make that a version of a C, you know.
But what a beautiful variation to it. Yeah.
I love that. So I think, you know, long story short, I really love, again, standard tuning, and it's really, really cool when it's like, oh, what tuning is that, you know?
Yeah.
I've heard, especially Tommy Manu has talked about that too. He has some chords that, you know, people ask him the same thing, and I think that's a high compliment when, you know, someone can, because a lot of times we might think standard tuning is stuck with sort of first position cowboy chords, which are extremely effective, and I play them every day.
Mm-hmm.
But when you do venture out, there are a lot of really unique, or if I do something like, it's like a B flat, add 9, sharp 11. But does it matter what it's called, or how it functions and how it feels? That's more where I...
Now, let me ask you the $1 million question there. You are using chords that require a good deal of hand stretching and hand flexibility. Do you have any exercises or any guidance for folks that are trying to increase their hand flexibility?
Absolutely. I started stretching because I was trying to avoid bar chords. Mm-hmm. The fact of bar chords, you know, especially the F, you know, early on when you learn that F where you put the first finger up here, you always get that little, and then especially learning this one right here. So I remember learning like the bar chords like for C. I would rather play this than try to bar here, the tension here. But when it comes to bar chords, we do rely a little bit too much on this. And so this hand is never going to be as strong as just kind of like, you know, the movement of the shoulders. So I'll actually kind of like tilt the guitar back, and then this is maybe the last 15% of the pressure. But when it comes to stretches, I don't necessarily have super long fingers, but a lot of it comes down to where your thumb position is. Mm-hmm. So it's easy, especially if you sit and play on a couch, it's easy to rest your elbow. It's easy for the thumb to be in the sort of baseball bat grip. Yeah. And you can immediately see how it limits your stretch. But once this comes down, you have freedom now. Your elbow's free, and also you can kind of like angle your wrist, and that gives you a little bit more. So one thing that I started doing to stretch, my teacher showed me this a long time ago, was just start on the 5th, 6th, and 7th and 8th fret, just on any of the strings. I'll start on the G right here, and then I would just sort of switch positions. Like my first finger will go up to the 5th. They'll each stay on those individual frets, but I'll switch strings. So the second finger goes down to the D while this goes here, and then I just go back and forth like this. And then I try to go a little bit farther from there, and then I try to go a little bit farther from there. And the whole point is just gaining comfort in those. A lot of the stretches that I have will require, you know, a pinky stretched really high. But one thing I realized is that a lot of us favor this side of the hand, meaning especially if you're going to play, if Sharon is watching, she always gives me a hard time about the E add 9. She's like, stop teaching that. It's going to ruin everybody, you know, that chord right there. But if you think about, again, we play where this part of the hand is touching the neck, then it's very hard to stretch up. So the way that I think about it is when you're doing a stretch, start with the farthest place first and then reach back. And what's different about that is if you place your pinky here, then when I go back here, it automatically, it doesn't become easy, but it's easier than if you start here and then try to reach that up. So those are how I would begin to sort of help a student with some of those crazy stretches.
What other projects do you have going on in the mix?
I started it was sort of a creativity / mental health project where I would sit down with a nylon string guitar, which is totally foreign. And I know to any non-guitar player, they're like, what, it's a guitar, it's tuned the same, but it's a different world. It's a different touch, everything about it. And so in an effort to stop my over-analyzing, because I can spend years, and I do, on a piece, I sat down with my guitar, and each time I would set a timer for an hour. And what could I write and arrange within the hour? And typically I write things way beyond my ability, chart them out, and then I print it out and try to learn it. This was what feels true to me in the moment with a concept that I was thinking about within an hour, plus or minus just, and then try to record it not long thereafter. So I've been releasing singles. I've just released number 4. And that's been a lot of fun to try a totally different approach and feel. What's interesting is that, and I think that these pieces, they're not meant to be terribly complicated. So I've been getting messages from people that are taking the concept of the song and learning the song each month and having that be sort of like their personal reflection as well as, so it's the first music series I think that's been very participatory. And so that's been a lot of fun to try. I always love trying new things. So.
Yeah. Explain the double cables, William is asking.
You got it.
Willard is asking.
Yeah, so I think part of my setup, I did not talk through what the actual electronics are in here. So I have 2 different sets of electronics in here, and when I have my kalimba attached, then there's another one that's 3 cables coming out. But one of them goes to, it's called the K&K Classic. And the Classic, those are little soundboard transducers, which are these little discs, you put underneath the soundboard, and then that, picks up the top of the guitar. Sheldon doesn't, the way that he builds, Sheldon Schwartz, the way he builds guitars, he doesn't have a bridge plate underneath, which is really interesting. So we have to use the 4-disc. So it's there's 4 of the discs as opposed to the standard K&K Pure Mini or Pure Western Mini. Typically there's 3 discs, but anyway, so there's 4 discs, and I think that does make a big difference. I think it gives a little more sensitivity. And then I have a microphone in here from a company called NV Tone, and they were from Ukraine, and now they are based in Canada. And so it comes with a little preamp that powers the microphone, and then I sort of blend both of those together with my radial. And you can, sum the, you can wire them so both systems go into one cable, but I'm just such an analog guy. Like I love this pickup goes there, and these settings do that. And so it looks a little bit crazy, but that's why it does serve a purpose.
Yeah. What are you going to play for us as we finish up?
I'll play this piece. This is called The Meeting at the Window. And this is a piece that I wrote. I did a record with Will Ackerman, who's, I have 2 older brothers, identical twins. They're 2 years older than me. And when I was really little and they were running around the house, my mom would put me in front of the record player and to Will's music, And so it was really cool all these years later to be able to work with him and get to know him, become friends. And we, did a bit of touring together. And so this was a piece that I wrote for him after we both realized that we had a favorite spot in Italy. There's this little window in Bologna, in Italy, that you can go to. The locals can take you to it. You would never recognize it as a tourist, but the whole city is on these canals and rivers, and you go and after, they built up, eras of the city on top of one another, but you go to this window and you open it up and you can see down into where all the intersecting rivers are. And so I call this the meeting at the window for Will. So
beautiful. Gorgeous.
Thank you.
Absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Pleasure.
much for
Thanks
being
so
here
much,
with
Steve.
us.